Are you afraid of something? Are you afraid of anything? Do you have fears? The question is, what are you most afraid of in your life? What is one thing, or what are three things? Can you think of any one or two or three biggest fears in your life that literally paralyze you? Let me know, what are you most scared of? Let me know the fears that almost stop you in your tracks. Has fear ever controlled you in such a big way, controlled your heart, your mind so bad that you almost felt paralyzed, literally paralyzed, as if you couldn't move, you couldn't make any decision, you just stopped where you were, you couldn't do anything in that moment? I'll tell you one thing. Fear changed my life. I used to be known for being very direct, fearless, unashamed, unafraid, unapologetic, so much so that either people loved me for being the direct person I was or hated me for being the direct person I was. I say was because I was. I am getting back there, but I am not there yet. Again, from being direct and fearless, I became someone too busy people pleasing, being afraid of offending, being afraid of speaking my mind, being afraid of losing people who did not respect me, did not care for me, and literally treated me as a doormat. I stopped functioning. And with fear having its complete grip on me for almost half a decade, I didn't know what I was doing with my life. I was pretending to be somebody I'm not. I was living in ways and shape that wasn't authentic at all. I was showing up for people. I was smiling on camera. I was shaking hands, but I was shaking inside. Before every meeting, before every catch up, before everything public or one-on-one, I almost wanted to run away somewhere so far that I never have to speak to anybody again. And that had nothing to do with me being an introvert. It was all about me being afraid. My fear made me a person that I almost came to hate, despise, and dislike. I could not stand myself until I realized my fear is my power. It is my guide. It is my fuel to creating a life of intentionality-driven strategic actions of my own life, so that I can dream big and make it happen the way I always talk about. I talk about it in my shows, I talk about it in my business. But for me, it is still a process. I am still working on my fears. I'm still working on making my fear my fuel. But before we go any further, if you're tuning in for the first time, I'm Sebastian Ane, and I'm the Almost Naked CEO and intention strategist. And I'm here because I care and because I give a damn. But today is not about me. It's about the person I'm interviewing. It's someone I've come to respect and admire and love so deeply. And I'm so deeply grateful for, because she is pretty much the living example for me, what you can do when you use your fear as a fuel to actually use it as a resource to change your life and to create a life of your own intention. So, without further ado, let me bring the guest to the stage. Team, if you would please. And here she is. Hey, Jill, how you going?
I'm really good, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you.
It always is a pleasure. Now, Joe, for people who don't know you yet, I just want to have a little bit of, I don't do the bios and all that. So if you don't mind telling people who you are and what you do.
So I am an introvert ally, an introvert advocate, because I am an introvert. And I finally got mad enough to realize that actually it's a pretty unjust world out there for introverts. Wherever I was working in the world, I would see introverts being overlooked and undervalued. And when I got mad enough, finally, I established Flourishing Introverts. And my mission, and it is a big mission, is to enable 1 million introverts to know they are enough. And that's what I'm here to do.
And from what I know, you're doing that job really well, which is where I have to actually ask you, can you name one thing or three things or situations that you're afraid of or used to be?
Yeah, I can, absolutely. One of the things that used to hold me back a lot, and most of my fears are in the past, but not it all, which we'll hear about. I used to be afraid of being judged without being given the opportunity for people to get to know who I really was. Because I'm quieter in nature, you won't think that by the end of today, by the way, but because I'm quieter in nature and I only speak when I have something of value to add, it was very easy for me to be overlooked and for people to rule me out of certain things. And I really was fearful of people making snap judgments about me without evidence or just based on their perception. So that was one for me. Another one, which might surprise you, is I used to be afraid of speaking in public. I trained to be a trainer for the first time in 1987, before some of your audience are born, I'm aware of that. And I can still remember vividly, because it was a time where we had big old video recorders and our training to be a trainer sessions were recorded and we had to watch ourselves back. And I remember being mortified at just how shy and awkward I looked. It was a really painful experience for me. So painful that I nearly gave it up in those very early weeks. But there was something in my spirit that said, no, don't give it up. This is for you. So I've gone from being afraid to speak in public to doing it a lot of the time. And I think the third one is something that I was reminded of again just these last 2 days. I've just come back from the Windsor Dialogue, Windsor Leadership Dialogue, 2 days. And we were exploring the whole area of trust. And I realized that for the first time in a community of really powerful peers and people that, I aspire to be like, and who are MBEs and OBEs and all sorts of things, I realized that whereas I used to be afraid to share my perspective on something for fear that it might be mocked by somebody or wasn't as good as theirs, over those 2 days, Monday and Tuesday just gone, actually, I was able to challenge and share my perspective, and people came up and thanked me for it afterwards. But it is interesting how when you hold a perspective that's likely to be somewhat provocative or somewhat kind of different, that without the confidence, without using that fear as fuel, we can remain silent and just keep that perspective to ourselves.
Absolutely. And before we talk about fear being our fuel, I have to ask you, how how has fear affected you in your life, career, or relationships, or anywhere else at all?
It certainly held me back from applying for opportunities. I remember I was an engineer in BT at a time when women didn't do that kind of thing, so pre 1987. And I was nominated. I think it was a novelty thing. That's what I still tell myself. But I was nominated or asked if I would be prepared to be nominated for Engineer of the Year. And my immediate thought was, no, because they're going to find out that I'm not as good as they think I am. So it was a classic case of imposter phenomenon kind of kicking in. And so there are opportunities that I've missed. There are, based on a fear of being found out, and those cause me to hold back. And in personal relationships, I realized that what I often did was held back the full me, because I know that I used to be a people pleaser. I am still a bit, but I used to be a much bigger people pleaser. And so I would kind of become the person that they wanted or that they might find acceptable, rather than who I really was. Because for some people, even as an introvert, I knew I was probably going to be too much.
Absolutely. And I think before anybody else, it's our fear that actually is the biggest hurdle for ourselves than anybody else.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
may not do or say things that we're afraid of, but our fear almost tells us that it's real. People are judging us, people are rejecting us, people are defining who we are, or criticizing who we are even before they actually do. So I do have to ask you, would it be fair to say that fear or being afraid is kind of exhausting?
It's a great question, and yes, I think it is. And again, I'll look at this from the introvert perspective, in that my energy reserves are precious. And one of the reasons that I found fear exhausting is because there was so much catastrophizing going on with I would make up what this was going to mean or what might happen. And that's the bit I found exhausting, was the catastrophizing bit. So what I realized, or what I came to realize, is that I'd rather be exhausted by making a difference, making a positive difference, than by getting myself het up in all sorts of different ways. Can't hear you.
Am I unmuted now, guys? Okay.
You are.
Sorry, they muted me. So what I was saying is, given that exhaustion of fear, or would it be fair to say like frustration, did it ever lead you to a moment, or do you remember the moment when you felt so exhausted, so frustrated, and so mad at being afraid that it made you think, that's it, I'm done living like this, I'm done being scared, I've got to do something about this, and I've got to change whatever this fear is into my power? Maybe that wasn't the term in your mind, but did something happen in your life that made you think, that's it, I am done, I can't live this way, that's not me?
It's interesting because there was no one big event that I remember, but it seemed to be a kind of an accumulation of things. There seemed to be, maybe for me, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, something in the end that was quite minor, but just had me go, okay, that's enough. And I think it was that moment of actually realizing that I was exhausted trying to be somebody that I wasn't, and that it was time to be me. And because the thing that had been holding me back from being me was a bit of fear, I think that was the time where I thought, actually, things do have to change. So it built over time, and therefore it was, gosh, how long ago was it now? 10, 15 years ago, as recently as that. And when when I say as recently as that, when you're my age, 10 and 15 years ago is quite recent. And it is one of those things that actually, if I always say I wouldn't change anything in my life, but if I would change something, it would to be braver earlier. It would be to use my fear as fuel earlier in my life rather than wait until my 50s to do it.
And what are you talking about your age? Because you're just 25, aren't you? Everybody's
I
25
know.
plus in my so here's the thing. We are talking about fear being our fuel, making fear literally our fuel so that we can go forward. We can do things we want to. Introvert or not, shy or not, which is not the same thing necessarily. But what are some of the ways that you would suggest for people to identify the fear and use their fear as their fuel, as something that drives them rather than makes them run away from life?
Yeah. I think one of the, having delved into this a bit over those 10 or 15 years, I think one of the things that hadn't occurred to me earlier, and I don't know why it hadn't, was that the way our bodies react to both fear and excitement is very similar. So our kind of sympathetic nervous system is activated in both of those situations. So there's a very thin line between whether we almost decide that we need to be fearful or we need to be excited. And if we think of some of the things our body does, we can feel our heart rate increasing. We often kind of, the breathing rate increases and we breathe up here in the upper chest rather than kind of nice deep breathing. We can get sweaty palms, all those sorts of things, heightened alertness, so many things. And they are the same for fear and excitement. So the reality for me is that we have some choice about how we interpret that state. So when I feel my heart beat faster, when I notice my sweaty palms, when I'm on a high state of alert, I can choose in that moment to say, is this fear or is this something else? Because if I've interpreted it as a threat, then clearly I'm going to go down the fear route. But if I interpret it as an opportunity or a positive challenge, then I could choose to go down the excitement route. So what I really want to encourage people to do is to get a bit playful, which sounds hard to do when you're already in a kind of heightened state. But I think that's time to experiment. So time to be present for the moment, really notice what's going on, and then ask yourself, how about, rather than falling into a habitual trap, a habitual way of thinking or being, what if this feeling was excitement rather than fear? What opportunities might open up if I thought about it as excitement? How might I grow as a result if I choose excitement in that moment? And that requires a number of things, really, one of which is to check my language. Because the language we use to and of ourselves and to other people is going to either embed me in that cycle of fear or get me kind of into a different state around excitement. And I think that's part of what enables us then to use the energy that's created in this moment positively, rather than have it stuck, rather than have us kind of go into a doom spiral where actually, as you said, we feel paralyzed, we feel disabled, unable to do anything. So in that moment, say, yeah, but what if this was excitement?
I absolutely love that, and I have a little perspective on that as well, which kind of works for me. First thing, I want to actually go back to what you said. You give quite a few signs of when your body is telling you, okay, something is happening. something is oncoming, and before you even know whether it's fear or whether it's excitement, but some of these signs are uncomfortable signs. So one thing
Sure.
that I strongly believe in is to listen to your body. Your body knows, it's telling you, it's so intuitive, it's telling you either you're in the wrong place or in the wrong company or in the wrong circumstances, and you need to take action. Now, as you
Yes.
said, and I absolutely agree, either you can choose to be afraid and panic and get all anxious, or you can choose, which is where I look at it as, I ask myself, what role am I playing right now to be in this situation, to be in this moment? Why is it scaring me? Why is it
Mm,
making me so anxious and alert and uncomfortable? And when I look at my role, instead of panicking, I ask myself, what can I do differently? What can I change
mm,
right now? And usually the first response that I get from within my mind is, okay, first of all, take deep breaths. Take some deep breaths. Maybe go for a walk, have a glass of water. Distract yourself just for a second so that you can gain control of your own thoughts first. And I think that's a really good combination that works for me. Listen to your body, find ways to reclaim your control on what's happening right now. In, I have my own CTR mantra that I'm not going to go into right now,
yeah.
but I do use that to get, okay, what can I do right now with the reality that I'm standing in so that I can at least survive the situation and then figure out how can I learn from this. So I think listening to our body is such an important thing. And as you said, figuring out whether it's excitement, whether it's, what can I do? How can I handle this? Where combination of all that can
Mm.
actually make such a big difference, at least in that. And I think that is what is making your fear as your fuel, right? To sort of change the situation and take control.
Absolutely, because if we do allow the possibility that this is excitement or could be reframed as excitement, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Absolutely. Reframe. I love that. Reframe in your mind what's going
Yeah,
on, and, figure out how can you reframe and reclaim, really. So I have to
absolutely.
ask you, fear can be quite frustrating, you know, so frustrating that it robs us of possibilities in our life. And
Yeah.
you have a perspective on this. I know this, how we can move away from frustration and thrive on our own terms. Could you please tell us more about, moving from frustration and creating and leading a better life?
Yeah, thank you. Because one of the things that I've realized is that I don't know anybody in the world who hasn't at some time felt frustrated, and probably many times, right? But the thing I've realized is that frustration is what I'm terming an empty emotion, because it's a sort of inertia that has the potential to just keep us stuck and feeling helpless and hopeless. And of course, all that does is it just reinforces the frustration. So it stalls us rather than propelling us forwards. And it means that we stay focused on what's wrong with now rather than focused on kind of what might be better in the future. And I think the final thing for me around frustration is that it keeps us kind of irritated, wound up, blood pressure increasing. So it is an empty emotion, but that can do quite a lot of potential damage. And it's why it's a word that many of my introverted clients have used, that they're frustrated that they don't get the opportunities, that they get overlooked, that the boss doesn't recognize that they've got their head down doing good work while all the office chatterers are kind of, getting opportunities they're not. So I've actually got a journey that I take people on that moves them from frustrated to flourishing. And we do that in 3 distinct phases. And the first phase is where we explore the possibility. Because when we're frustrated, we kind of close down. So the first thing we need to do is open up and just see the possibilities that are around us again, and create those possibilities for ourselves. Because whether you believe in manifestation or not, you know, we do create our own possibilities. So the first phase of the program is all about kind of, where do you want your life to be? What's your route to get there? What are the possibilities? If you could dream the, you know, unimaginable almost, what would that dream be? So we spend time really exploring the possibilities that you want to create in your life. And that might be how you're working. It might be how you're living. It might be your relationships. It can be all sorts of things. We then move on to how do you develop really grounded, solid credibility? Because for most introverts, they know they're credible, but because they haven't necessarily got the way of articulating that, or the opportunity in conversations to express that, they don't. The only way they get to show their credibility is by what they do. And of course, we live in a world where we have to be able to talk about it as well as be able to do it. So we look at how we can develop and demonstrate truly our credibility and talk about it. And then the third phase of the journey is all about visibility. And it's the thing that often introverts fear the most, is being visible. Goes back to the first time somebody asked me to do a Facebook Live. It was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. The first time I was asked to go on shows, it was like, really? Can we pre-record it? Because I don't really want to go live. But one of the things that, of course, we find is that the more we do the things that we supposedly fear, the less we fear them. But we have to take those first early steps. So I think that's my kind of route, if you like, from frustrated to flourishing.
Absolutely. And people, you can find the information on Joanna's website, which is flourishingintroverts.com. So you'll see the programs all out there. And, you know, one thing I have to say, Joe, that even though, you know, it is about introverts do have fear of, you know, getting too much attention, but there are a lot of myths around introversion as well. How do you think that we introverts actually allow those myths to become our fears, to become our reality?
We collude with them, actually. I chose to join a number of introvert Facebook groups, and I pop in and out every once in a while, but I'm constantly saddened, I think that is the only word I can use, by just how many people will say, I'm an introvert, so how can I ever get into a relationship? Or I'm an introvert, so I can't make a phone call, or I can't. It's full of, I can't do this because I'm an introvert. And the reality is that there may be several things going on here. One is that we're conflating other things with introversion. So whether it's social anxiety, whether it's misanthropy, whether it's shyness, whether it's depression, whatever it happens to be. So when we conflate what we're doing, because we know that introversion isn't a problem that needs fixing, we kind of then say, and those things don't need fixing either, which of course they do. And there are some very good therapies around for dealing with those other things, but we don't need therapy for introversion. So all the while we hide inside or behind our introversion, we are, like it or not, guilty of perpetuating the myths that introverts are not good leaders, they're socially awkward, they're, you know, everything we're unable to do, rather than looking around at the world's leaders, many of whom are introverts, and saying, that's what you can do when you're an introvert.
And, you know, that's a really good question. Can you name a few introvert leaders that people can listen to and go, oh my God, yes, that's, you know, here's an example.
Yeah. Richard Branson is one of them. Very entrepreneurial. As we know, he kind of set up pretty much all of the Virgin businesses before he sold them one by one, but his name is still associated with them. Incredibly successful. Simon Sinek, who is one of the people that majority of the time I agree with him about kind of what he's saying. Introvert, and he's got a lovely little YouTube clip about how he goes networking as an introvert. So if anyone didn't believe me, there's that. And then there are the classic kind of American leaders that many of us have heard about. So Bill Gates, Steve Jobs was an introvert, Marissa Mayer, introvert, Warren Buffett, introvert, Barack Obama, world leadership and business leadership is littered with introverted leaders.
So I have to do this. If anybody believes that introverts cannot be leaders, I have to say Simon Sinek. And the inner joke about that. But anyway, now people do think introverts are timid, they're antisocial, socially awkward, and whatnot. But are they?
No. In quick one-word answer, no, we're not. And I really hope that your viewers haven't perceived me as someone who's timid and socially awkward. But of course,
so are you saying that introverts can actually be sassy? Really?
I am indeed. And all it needs in a way is for me to take time to pre-charge before I do something like this, and I'll have a quiet evening after this too. But it's a myth to say that we're timid, to say that we're socially awkward. Do you know, everyone is socially awkward until they learn the skills not to be. And some of us, it takes longer because for an introvert, our batteries are drained by social interaction. So of course it feels a little bit different. But the generally held perception about this timidness is the very reason why I'm opening up the Sassy Introvert Society. And before people get a bit concerned about the negative connotations associated with sassiness, let me tell you what I mean by sassy. Because for me, it's about being a positive rebel. It's about if negative rebels break rules, positive rebels change the rules. So there are things that we need to do to disrupt things, processes, systems, stuff that's going on, but in a way that genuinely makes a difference. So I've got a bit of an acronym for, or some words that sassy means to me. Is it okay if I share them with you, Sebastian? Okay, so the first S of sassy, if you're a sassy introvert, you're self-aware. So you know your strengths and weaknesses, and you know how to articulate your strengths, and you know how to play to your strengths. And you've taken time to understand those weaknesses and determine which of them are allowable weaknesses because you don't need them particularly, but actually which you do need to work on. The A of sassy is that a sassy introvert is assertive. They know how to look after their own needs without trampling on the needs of others. So they're very good at putting in place boundaries and holding those boundaries, but in a very positive way. So we're not talking aggression here, which means that I have needs and I don't care about yours, or you don't have any. We're talking assertiveness. The pair of S's towards the end, we've got solution focused. So sassy introverts have a growth mindset. They want to know how to make things better, how to step up, how to be more positively rebellious, how to step into those leadership positions and take people with them on the journey. Which leads me to the next S, which is that they are definitely spirited. You know, one of my business principles is that I call myself quietly gutsy, in that I'm a bit of a terrier. I don't necessarily back down too easily. I'm certainly not afraid of my own shadow. And as we've heard from what I was saying at the beginning, I'm not afraid of holding a contrary position. and be in conversation and dialogue around that. So they need to be spirited. They need to be a bit gutsy. And the why of sassy is that they need to be confident and comfortable to be themselves. So they're not pretending, they're not masking, they are absolutely owning their introversion and wearing it as a crown almost. So really not thinking there's anything wrong with them because they are an introvert. So that's what I mean by a sassy introvert. There's nothing negative about it. It's actually a kind of, oh, watch me kind of person.
So because I missed that a little bit, tell me what the why is again.
Yourself. So a sassy
Right.
introvert is somebody who is so comfortable being an introvert, owning their introversion, articulating their strengths positively, that actually they're not masking, they're not pretending anymore. They are really being themselves.
Love that. And the team has that on screen so that if anybody needs to understand, this is what sassy stands for, and this is what they can use as a little card or something to remind themselves when somebody says, don't be too sassy, and you can just say, well, I am going to be sassy because that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of sassy introverts, there is one thing. The roots of fear take place very early on in the age. You're 3, 4, 5, and people start telling you, don't do this, don't do that. If you do this, this will happen. We're given all these scary imagery and messages that as a little child, as a child, we're not scared of anything. We touch, kids touch into the electricity holes, and they pick up, little insects and everything. They're not scared. They don't know that it's going to harm them or anything, but we make them scared. And a lot of that happens with introverts because we are different, because we do things differently. We are told, if you don't do this, you're not going to get successful. If you don't behave this way, nobody will notice you, nobody will value you. All that happens. What can adults do to not let fear shape their childhood and growth? And is there any resource you can provide that helps children and parents?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, when we're born and very young, we are not fearful. We're born with two fears. We're born of the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. If you've ever been around a very young child, their grip is phenomenal. The theory goes that you can almost hang them on a washing line and they will not let go. So we are all born with a fear of falling and a fear of loud noises. Everything else is a learned fear. Now, when you think about that and how many fears, young children and going on into adulthood, how many fears people have, then that in itself is a worrying thought about how we're brought up. Because, and you mentioned insects, I've often thought about when, am I going to share this story? Yeah, I will. When I was little, I've never been afraid of spiders, to the point where I would pull their legs off to see what would happen.
I'm really scared of them.
Yeah, really sorry about that. But I've watched other families, and of course, youngsters watch what their elders do. And if a parent runs around screaming, and I do know men who have to get their wives to get a spider out of the bath. So, if they see adults or older people reacting kind of badly or screaming or whatever, then of course that's part of the education process that has a younger person think, I ought to be scared of this. And of course, the problem is that we end up being scared of the wrong things and not being scared of the things that we probably should be a bit nervous or worried about. So over time, I've created a number of resources. I've got a downloadable, which is about parenting introverts. And it's just a few simple tips that parents can use to help understand their introverted child and help them know that they're enough. I've had a few articles published in the UK on the inside government's education hub, 2 articles aimed at teachers to help them understand their introverted students. And that's because a couple of years ago, somebody mentioned that given the extroversion bias that exists in adult education and in the workplace, if we tackled that in childhood, we would start to minimize and eventually eradicate the bias in the workplace, because children would grow up knowing that they were okay and valuing the difference, valuing the diversity. It took a while for that idea to kind of percolate through my brain, but as a result, I'm publishing a children's picture book on January the 22nd called, as you've got rightly there, Quiet is Fun Too. And the aim is that quiet children will have it read to them before they can read it for themselves, and just get that deep sense that, so there's nothing wrong with me. It took me till my 30s to know that. If children 4, 5, 6, 7 can know that, then I feel like I'm making a difference. But of course, the subtext to it is that as parents are reading it to their children, I'm educating the parents as well. So I'm being a bit sneaky with that one, really.
Well, that's clever. I have to ask, though, because I'm curious, and I'm pretty sure parents out there must be thinking, what's the format of the book? What can they expect, when they buy? Because it's for children who may not even know reading yet. So what kind of a book it is for parents to look at?
So it's a children's picture book, and the illustrator has done a beautiful job. I wanted the illustrations to be soft and to be quite calm, rather than a lot of children's book, it's wall-to-wall block color, and it's kind of all a bit too busy. And I knew that introverted readers prefer something quieter. So the illustrator has done a beautiful job of that. I'm Andrea Karba from Slovenia. Let's hope we can tag her somewhere, because she has done a beautiful job. And it's 12 4-line verses, rhyming verses. So it has a rhythm that children often like to kind of move to almost, but it's easy for the parents to read because of the rhyming and the rhythm that's associated with it. But what I realized as I was writing it is that if I want it to be a book that children want to read over and over again, there has to be something that brings them back. And so at the end of every verse, there is a question or two that they can answer that possibly could be answered differently every time they read the book. So, for instance, Andy has a best friend, Ray, who is an extrovert, and she's lively and loud, and they know that they're quite different, but they help each other. And so the question at the end of that little verse is, who have you helped today, and who has helped you? So this is encouraging kindness in us all as well, which just fills my heart. It really does.
Absolutely. Kindness, collaboration. I absolutely see a theme going on. And I'm absolutely wishing that this is one of your many children's books and other books that you'll be writing. So I'm excited for this. I'm actually thrilled. Part of me wants to be that child, because I'm going to be buying this one and reading it as if I was 5, 6, or 7.
Yeah.
But I do have to ask you, since we're talking about fear and we're talking about fear being our fuel, what are you still afraid of in your life? What do you still don't want to happen in your life?
Do you know, the one thing that I'm still fearful of is not living my life to the full. So I'm fearful of having regrets. Sadly, this year, I've lost 2 of my best friend and a very good colleague well before their time. And in the preceding years, I've lost some people who are very special to me, younger than me. So it did bring me a sense of my own mortality, which isn't a bad thing, but it has reminded me really that actually, if I don't live life to the full and have regrets, then that's a life not well lived. I'd rather blush at how badly I've done something than regret not giving it a go, because what's the worst that's going to happen in most cases? And I do have a
Absolutely.
favorite kind of poem that has been on my wall for a long time, and it's by Hunter S. Thompson. I'm sure people have heard it. But it says, life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, wow, what a ride. And that's how I want my life to be. I don't want the regrets.
Absolutely freaking love that. What a way to actually close. I do have to ask before we do close, how do you want your audience to turn their fear into their fuel?
I think the things we've mentioned, the first thing is really to pay attention to your body, to pay attention to what it is you're feeling. And then if it's a learned fear, actively unlearn it, intentionally unlearn the fear, because it's probably not rooted in reality. And then it's about encouraging people to experiment, to play with, but what if this was excitement? How would life be different if this was excitement and not fear?
I absolutely love that. And you actually took me to a phrase that I use in a program that I'm working on, which is unlearn to rebuild. So I don't know if you knew this, but this is a good advertising for me. So that's excellent. And thank you so much. I think you already do teach me every single day how to get rid of fear, how to use my fear to be my strength. And I'm so grateful. And I'm grateful for you to be coming here once again. And I look forward to having you again on my shows.
I thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely. Please don't go anywhere. I will be back in a second. I'm just going to close up. So that was Joanna Rawbone, the flourishing introvert, or as she calls herself on the podcast, the flourishing introvert who talks. Well, not the who that I'm adding, but she is a living example of how to overcome your fears and make it your power. And not only just make it your power, make it a tool to help others like you to feel great about themselves, to feel complete about themselves. With that, I am working on my fears, and this year is all about that. So you'll watch that journey. For now, this was Sebastian One, the Almost Naked CEO and Intention Strategist. I'm here because I care and because I give a damn. Until next, you take care, dream big, and make it happen.